If you dance this waltz, you marry my son. That was the challenge thrown at a black maid in front of high society. What they didn't know was that she was once a dance champion. They laughed at her. They mocked her. To them, she was just the maid, a shadow in the grand ballroom, polishing floors no one noticed, carrying trays no one thanked her for. But tonight would be different. Because when the millionaire sneered, "If you dance this waltz, you marry my son," he thought he was humiliating her. He thought he was making her small, reminding her of her place. What he didn't know was this: the maid they looked down upon was once a champion, a queen of the ballroom, a woman who had tasted glory, only to bury it deep beneath the weight of survival. And in one single dance, and one breathtaking turn of the waltz, she would silence an entire room and change her fate forever. This is not just a story about a dance. It's a story about dignity, courage, and the moment when truth can no longer be hidden. When a wealthy millionaire sneered at his maid, mocking her by saying she could never dance a waltz with his son, the entire ballroom laughed. To them, it was just a cruel joke, another way for the rich to humiliate the help. But what they didn't know was that the woman they mocked was once a hidden star, a dancer whose grace could silence any room. And when she stepped onto that dance floor, the truth she had buried for years came alive, leaving every guest gasping in awe, and the millionaire himself humiliated beyond repair. The Callahan mansion was the kind of place people whispered about. Its white marble pillars stretched high into the sky. Golden gates gleamed under the sunlight, and inside, chandeliers shimmered like captured stars. To outsiders, it was the definition of success, a symbol of wealth and power. And to Richard Callahan, the master of the house, it was his throne, proof that he was untouchable. But behind the grandeur worked a woman who the world rarely noticed. Her name was Evelyn Brooks. She wore simple clothes. Her hands were roughened by years of scrubbing, polishing, and carrying trays. To the Callahans, she was the maid. Invisible, unimportant. But Evelyn carried secrets the walls of that mansion could never hold. Before life forced her into servitude, before the bills and the grief and the loss, she had been something else entirely. Evelyn had been a dancer. Not just any dancer, a champion. In her youth, Evelyn glided across stages in Europe where the lights shone bright and crowds cheered her name. She had trophies, medals, the respect of an art that belonged to her soul. Dance wasn't just movement, it was her life, her language, her freedom. But life is rarely kind to dreamers. When her husband passed away and she was left with a child to raise and debts piling up, Evelyn traded satin gowns for aprons, ballrooms for broom closets. No one in that mansion knew who she once was. To them, she was simply the help. That truth remained hidden until the night of the gala. The Callahans' annual gala was the most anticipated event of the year. Politicians, bankers, CEOs, and their jeweled spouses filled the glittering ballroom. Champagne flowed endlessly. Violins played waltzes that echoed through the hall, and every corner of the mansion sparkled with wealth. Evelyn moved quietly among them, balancing trays, refilling glasses, her presence as subtle as the shadows cast by the chandeliers. But Richard Callahan noticed her, not with kindness, but with disdain. He thrived on humiliation, on reminding people of their place. His son, Matthew Callahan, however, was different. At 28, Matthew had a gentle heart, a kindness his father called weakness. He often spoke to Evelyn, asked about her day, and treated her with a respect that startled the rest of the staff. When the orchestra struck a sweeping waltz, couples poured onto the floor. Dresses swirled, shoes clicked against the polished marble. Matthew stood off to the side, avoiding the shallow Harrises his father paraded before him. And that was when Richard, glass of wine in hand, decided to strike. With a mocking smile, loud enough for all to hear, he sneered, "Matthew, if you really want to embarrass me tonight, why don't you dance with the maid? If she can last one waltz with you, I'll let her marry you." The room burst into cruel laughter. Guests chuckled behind their jeweled fans, men snorted into their drinks, and Evelyn froze where she stood, her face flushed with shame. She wanted to disappear, to shrink so small no one could see her. But Matthew didn't laugh. Instead, he stepped forward, ignoring the sneers and the stares. He extended his hand to Evelyn. His voice was steady, kind, and loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Miss Evelyn, would you grant me this dance?" Gasps rippled through the room. The laughter fell into stunned silence. All eyes turned to Evelyn, the maid, the servant, the woman no one believed belonged on that floor. Her heart pounded. She hadn't danced in years. Her shoes were not made for ballrooms. Her dress was plain, and her hands still smelled faintly of polish from the silver tray she had been carrying. But something inside her stirred. The part of her that remembered the rhythm, the music, the way her body belonged to the dance. Slowly, hesitantly, Evelyn placed her hand into his. The orchestra began. At first her steps were cautious, her muscles stiff, her body uncertain, but the music flowed like a river, and Evelyn found herself remembering. The violins soared, the cellos hummed, and suddenly the maid was gone. In her place was a woman transformed. Her posture straightened, her movements smoothed, and her feet glided across the marble with flawless grace. With every turn, every spin, every dip, the crowd's disbelief deepened. Matthew followed her lead, his steps guided as much by her mastery as by the music itself. The laughter had died completely. The only sound was the orchestra and the collective breath of an audience that could not believe their eyes. Evelyn was not merely keeping up with Matthew, she was outshining every guest in that room. Her elegance, her precision, her artistry, she danced not like a maid pretending, but like a queen reclaiming her throne. Whispers rose among the guests. "Who is she?" someone murmured. "I swear I've seen her face before." Another voice cut through. "That's Evelyn Brooks, the dancer. She won the European Championship in Paris 15 years ago." Gasps, shock, recognition. The truth Evelyn had buried for so long spilled into the open. She was not just a servant, she was a legend. As the final notes of the waltz echoed through the ballroom, Evelyn spun into one last graceful dip. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Guests stood from their seats, clapping, cheering, even whistling. For the first time in years, Evelyn's name was not whispered in pity, it was celebrated in awe. Matthew bowed deeply to her, his eyes filled with admiration. He whispered, "That was extraordinary," though his words were drowned out by the ovation. Richard Callahan stood frozen, his glass trembling in his hand. His smirk had vanished, replaced with a face red with anger and humiliation. His cruel joke had turned into his undoing. Instead of mockery, Evelyn had earned the spotlight. Instead of shame, she had reclaimed her honor. The ballroom buzzed with excitement, guests crowding around her, eager to speak to the woman they had dismissed only minutes before. Richard's attempt to belittle her had elevated her instead. And in that moment, Evelyn Brooks knew something with absolute certainty. This was not the end of her story. This was only the beginning. Because the dance that was meant to humiliate her would set off a chain of events that none of them, neither Richard nor Matthew, nor even Evelyn herself, could have predicted.